This will be maybe the most painful video we've made all the year. I mean, this video we're going to go through and talk about some players that I thought were the most overrated players in fantasy football coming into this season. Possibly being buy low candidates at this point. But before we get into it, go down there, drop a like on this bad boy, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you want to check out any of these player props, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the comment section and the description of this video. When you go and sign up for Underdog Fantasy and use promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. So deposit $10. Immediately have $20 in your account, available in damn near every single state. Just make sure you go through the link in the comment section and use promo code FLOCK. And if you want to ask me anything, if you want to tell me I'm stupid, the comment section is where you can do that. But I think that should be it. Let's go ahead and let's dive right into this. And let's go into Jamar Chase / Hollywood Brown. We had them on the video last week. I'm going to continue to talk about them specifically for contending teams that are going to be true playoff contenders. If you're sitting at 4-6, if you need a win right now, if you're at 3-7 and we are saying it's win or go home, please, for the love of God, don't be trading for an injured wide receiver. Focus in on points in your lineup right this second. But I know we have a lot of people that watch this channel that are 8-2, 9-1, 7-3. And at that point, we should begin to think about weeks 15, 16, 17. We should begin to think about the fantasy football playoffs and what actually matters here. And I think with Jamar Chase, is a wide receiver that, of course, avoided the IR. Last time he played was October 23rd. So, hell, I mean, I don't want to say he's coming back this week, but I don't necessarily think that Jamar Chase is going to be missing another 3 or 4 games. I know for a damn fact, or at least I want to pretend like I know. Keep in mind, this is the same guy I told you to trade for Keenan Allen earlier this season. I want to almost guarantee that Chase will be back for the fantasy football playoffs. That's the case. We know that for that 3-game stretch, while I wouldn't rank him this way, it's still 100% a possibility that he would be the wide receiver 1 overall. So I love going out there and trading for Jamar Chase. Hollywood Brown going to be a little bit different because with Jamar Chase, you can trade for him in a 10-team league, 12-team league, 14-team league. Doesn't matter how many flex spots. He's going to fit your roster regardless. Hollywood Brown, I would only advise to trade for in a very specific scenario. But in this scenario, I think he can be a great value. If you're playing in a deeper format where there are at least 12 teams and at least 2 flex spots. If you're playing in that deeper format, even if you have DeAndre Hopkins as the solidified alpha wide receiver in Arizona, I still think that Hollywood Brown could be a very viable flex for the fantasy football playoffs. I would be hesitant to go out there and trade for him if you play in like a 10-team league with only 1 flex spot where depth doesn't matter too much though, because in that format, honestly, if you're a playoff contending roster, you may not even start Hollywood Brown. So please be aware of your format, your record, your overall roster construction, and how that will dictate what trade values you'll be willing to go after. But now going over to our next guy, he's been on every single video for us for, 6 weeks. I don't know how long. Amon-Ra St. Brown is still a clear buy low candidate. I know you're going to say, well, Mason, he had 20 points this past week. How the hell am I supposed to trade for him? I still think you could get value on Amon-Ra St. Brown here. This is a wide receiver that has not scored a touchdown since week 2. Now, this is no fault to his own, in my opinion. I think that this has to do with a little bit of just natural touchdown variance. We know touchdowns are, I don't want to say purely random occurrences, but they are going to be very volatile. And you can see a player like Chris Godwin going into last week. You know, he was our top buy low guy who was just getting consistent volume, was unlucky, was not scoring the ball, and things are going to change soon. But with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm very comfortable projecting that that's going to change. I'm very comfortable saying that he will be a wide receiver that's going to start to score again. Because if we go back to what we had at the end of his rookie season, touchdown, 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 almost every game. If we go back to what we had before the injury this year, you had Amon-Ra St. Brown with 3 touchdowns through the first 2 weeks, looking like he was this year's Cooper Kupp. I mean, over the past 3 weeks since he's returned from his injury, he's averaged 10 targets a game, which is right in line with what we saw before the injury. You really love that kind of volume. I think if we are looking at this Detroit Lions offense, it makes sense why he's getting the volume. We have Jameson Williams still injured. You have DJ Chark on the IR. Josh Reynolds has been out. And honestly, one of the most important things is TJ Hawkinson being in Minnesota is just opening up so many of those targets, specifically over the middle around the line of scrimmage. And I think that with the removal of Hawkinson, you should naturally assume that Amon-Ra St. Brown has a higher percentage of this overall offense's touchdowns going forward. He had a good week this past week, but I still think we have to include him on every buy low video because I think that he can go from scoring 20 points in a game to maybe 28 points next week. But going over to a wide receiver people are actually very worried about, Mike Evans is someone that, yes, looked bad in Germany. Mike Evans is someone that was bad a week ago as well. Mike Evans back-to-back games here with only 40 receiving yards, 54 receiving yards. I mean, it hasn't been great, but if we're looking at the underlying numbers for Mike Evans, I'm honestly still comfortable projecting him as a high-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy. Going back to what we've been discussing with Chris Godwin previously, while yes, Brady doesn't look as good as he has in years past. I mean, you can't blame the guy. He's 100 years old, but still, it doesn't matter from a fantasy football context when they are throwing the ball at such a rapid rate. And on top of this, you just have, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin getting close to 10 targets every single week. If you're looking at Evans so far this season, the man has 76 targets. Now, going back historically, you've seen Mike Evans consistently command a 10% touchdown rate, where maybe off of 76 targets, you've expected 7-8 touchdowns. Well, with Evans, the touchdowns haven't been there. You've only had 3 so far this season. If we go back and look historically, this should change relatively soon for Mike Evans. I understand why people are a little bit worried here because he's had back-to-back down games, but the underlying targets are still there. I think Mike Evans is still an incredible option. This volume is not going anywhere in the passing game, and historically speaking, you should expect touchdowns coming soon for Evans. So I think he's a great buy low guy, regardless of if you're playing in a non-PPR or a full PPR format. But going over to our next player, before we get to the guys that are really going to be painful, we'll save them for the end. I actually don't want to talk about them because it's not going to be great. Let's instead go look at Garrett Wilson. Quick update. He had a bye week, so naturally when a player's coming off a bye, their owners just kind of forget about him. It's the craziest thing ever. Last week, you're able to trade for Saquon Barkley at like a 5% discount, which should have never even been a possibility. Garrett Wilson, you can get that discount. Over the past 2 weeks, Garrett Wilson has had 14 receptions. Garrett Wilson has averaged 100 receiving yards over the past 2. It's going to be interesting to see the usage of Elijah Moore coming off the bye. I don't necessarily know if the Jets are going to decide, you know what? Yeah, it's crappy that Elijah Moore is being a pissy boy and that he doesn't feel like he's getting a fair shot. And instead of benching him, how about we just give him what he wants? How about we just start funneling more targets in his direction? That's a possibility, but I honestly don't think that's going to be the case. You look at Elijah Moore and the usage with an injured Corey Davis over the past few. They only use Elijah Moore in the slot now. Elijah Moore's only in the slot in place where they have 3 wide receivers on the field. Garrett Wilson's been dominating targets. If we look at the past 3 weeks, the Broncos, the New England Patriots, the Buffalo Bills, he's had tough matchups. I think it will be a much better situation going forward. But now going over to our next guy, Amari Cooper. We talked about him a ton. I just want to throw him on this video officially so we can tell you we said to buy low before Watson came back in. Home away splits. It's everything with Amari. Everything. Away games. 17, 9, 74, 32 receiving yards. 0 touchdowns. Home games. 101, 76, 44, 131 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. Down week because he was away. Down week because still had Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. But I think long-term, when we get Deshaun Watson in, when he has the #1 playoff schedule among all wide receivers, Amari Cooper can still easily be a low-end wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Hell, you should be excited about both Amari and Donovan Peoples-Jones whenever we get Deshaun Watson back in here. But going over to Baltimore, obviously I'm not going to be able to tell you, go buy low on Rashad Bateman. He's out for the rest of the year. Of course, we know we can't buy a receiver, but we can buy their #1 receiver, and that is going to be Mark Andrews here. With Mark Andrews, I understand he hasn't given you production in quite some time. If you're looking at this with Andrews, the last time we had a game better than 33 receiving yards was October 16th. It was a month ago. You had the injury with Andrews. You had the bye week. Very excited that he got a bye week this past week. I think it was probably perfect timing for him to nurse the shoulder, for him to nurse, a multitude of injuries he's been dealing with. But going forward, Mark Andrews, who had been dominant through the first half of the season, is even in a better situation for the second half because you have no Rashad Bateman in this offense. With no Rashad Bateman, yes, maybe we expect fewer passing yards in general in Baltimore, but what we can safely say is Devin Duvernay is operating a little bit more as a decoy wide receiver. Devin Duvernay with his speed, with his kick returning ability, is able to go through and take safety attention. And he's not a player that you can completely forget about, but you're not funneling targets in the direction of Devin Duvernay. Instead, those targets will be funneled over to Mark Andrews. I think Mark Andrews is still in the same tier as Travis Kelce. If we're going to be honest with the injury to Rashad Bateman going forward, the volume in the percentage of this offense he should account for. So I like going through, buying low on Andrews. I think if you could maybe trade away the combo of, say, a marginal tight end, I don't want to use the word marginal, but maybe a mid tight end one like TJ Hawkinson, and then go throw in another wide receiver into the deal. Maybe you decide to go ahead and trade TJ Hawkinson as well as Christian Kirk, and you go get Mark Andrews. I actually may really like that. But now going over to the most painful part of this video, not even remotely close. Let's talk about the guys that I crapped on all offseason, that I built a brand upon hating, and now they may be interesting values. Starting off with Michael Pittman Jr. With Michael Pittman Jr., you know, we were getting so much hate in the offseason to say, slow your roll. He's not a top 10 wide receiver. Why the hell are y'all saying this? Matt Ryan's not that good. Got so much hate for it, and I think a lot of people have come around and realized, yeah, Matt Ryan's not that good. Yeah, this offense isn't as good as advertised. Yeah, Michael Pittman is not a top 10 wide receiver. But to be honest with you, I think Michael Pittman Jr. is exactly what you should have thought he was coming into this season. I think that he's still going to be a mid-wide receiver 2 based off of volume and volume alone. I think he is around wide receiver 18, 19 the rest of the way. Now, if we look at the underlying numbers for Michael Pittman Jr. with the opportunity he's had in Indianapolis, the targets have been there. This is a man that's had 85 targets so far this season. Now, of course, they haven't gone through their bye week, so he is averaging about 8.5 targets a game, but that's the exact kind of volume that you want to see. With the Indianapolis Colts, we talked about this going into this past week where, yeah, maybe you were very worried about Jeff Saturday coming over. Maybe you were worried about this team possibly going out there and tanking, but it couldn't have been worse than it was through the first half of the season. This offense, I mean, maybe they can technically get worse, but it would be very difficult for them to. Coming into the week, they were dead last in points per game, the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, they had scored 20, 20, 17, 12, 27, 10, 16, and 3. So Michael Pittman Jr. only has 1 touchdown so far this season. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to tell you he's going to be a top 10 wide receiver like people drafted him for. No, of course, he's not going to be that. But I think he can be a mid-wide receiver 2 in a full PPR format if he continues to see this type of target volume. And I'm seeing people go through and rank Michael Pittman Jr. as if he's a high-end wide receiver 3. I'm seeing people bench Michael Pittman Jr., which I wouldn't advise that because if the volume stays this way, he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 2. But if the touchdowns come on a little bit stronger, I think that could be bumped up to where he's a mid-wide receiver 2, maybe even a high-end wide receiver 2. Now, I built the entire Flock network on one principle and one principle alone, that Courtland Sutton is the most overrated player in fantasy football when Jerry Jeudy is healthy. Yes, I've said so many bad things about Courtland Sutton in the past, and I'm not going to apologize. People were drafting Courtland Sutton over Jalen Waddle. Okay. But I can be realistic. When we have people in the comment section asking us if they should drop Courtland Sutton, the hate has gone way too far. Because if we look at Courtland Sutton since the year 2020, and we look at his points per game in contest where Jerry Jeudy has missed, Courtland Sutton's been a phenomenal receiver. The issue is when Jerry Jeudy's in here, Courtland Sutton doesn't get the volume to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense. The issue is when Jerry Jeudy's healthy, Jerry Jeudy's actually the guy that's getting the volume as the wide receiver 1. But now Jerry Jeudy going down with the ankle injury, I don't want to say I'm all in on Courtland Sutton, but he is now a viable flex play. Courtland Sutton will now be inside our top 30 wide receiver rankings this week. He may be inside the top 24 if Jerry Jeudy's going to miss. Now, at the time of this recording, I'm recording this on Monday. We don't have official reports on how long this injury should last for Jerry Jeudy, but I'm a little bit worried. It's an ankle injury. It looked gross whenever it happened. I think we have possibly a month here of Courtland Sutton dominating as the wide receiver 1 in Denver. You have no Jeudy. You have no KJ Hamler. You have no Tim Patrick. Everything has broken right for Courtland Sutton so far this season, but the hate is at an all-time high. So I'm sorry. I know we're going against everything when we're saying this, but when his situation has changed this much and we can project him to have 10, 11 targets a game, I think very similar to Michael Pittman Jr., he can be a mid-wide receiver too in fantasy. And we're probably going to rank him that way if we have no Jerry Jeudy. Going back to when Jerry Jeudy was injured earlier on in the season, 11 targets, 7 receptions, 122 receiving yards against the Texans, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 97 receiving yards against the 49ers. This past week, when Jerry Jeudy goes down with the first play, he has 11 targets, 6 receptions, 66 receiving yards. It's painful, but we got to say it. Now, I think that's all I got for you. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, please go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down there in the comment section. And if you want to check out any of these props on Underdog Fantasy, you can find the link in the live chat. You can find it in the comment section, the description of the video. Thank you so much. I truly do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day, and I really hope I get to see you in the live stream tonight.